Jonathan Richards and Kirsten Stanisich are one of the most respected duos on the contemporary Australian design scene, and I personally rate them 11 out of 10. Their practice, Richard Stanisich, or as I like to say, Richard Stanisich, manages to shift gears between residential, hospitality and commercial projects with absolute ease, which is not an easy thing to do when you're operating at that level, especially with a relatively small team. Their work is quite timeless, but at the same time, it's never predictable. It's quite directional and exciting, with a nod to classicism. And I feel like their work also feels quintessentially Australian. And in fact, I would say that they were the pioneers of the Australian contemporary design aesthetic, and they are responsible for inspiring a whole generation of designers. And I'm super pumped to talk to them. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I mean, I know I've seriously shut down Richard Stanisich for the afternoon because I've got both of you here on the sofa, and it's just so great to talk to you both. So I really want to say thank you for being here. And I want to start with a question which is probably the one that annoys me, but I like to ask it anyway. What is good design?
It's actually hard. It's hard, isn't it? We design things and then we hold it up and say, is that good? Is that good? I don't know that you ever really know. And what could be good design now might not be good design in 10 years' time. And I don't know that. Do you think we know the answer?
Well, no, not really. We do always sort of jokingly ask ourselves, is that good? Is that good?
Yeah.
Because it sounds so hopeless as two designers who are actually meant to be on top of what they're doing. Is it actually good? But I think, for me, I think that it's when design just feels right. It's hard to sort of aesthetically articulate it, but I think when you get a feeling when a place just feels right, it's not trying to scream design at you, it's not it's not trying to overpower the experience you're having, it's just got a sense of being right for where it is.
Well, we were meeting with a client this morning too. It was a residential project, and we were talking too about the idea that the interior is a framework and things within it can constantly change and evolve. So it's not a fixed thing. I guess good design's about something that can keep changing without having to be completely changed, like a slow change, slow evolution.
It's a canvas almost. But it has to be the right sort of canvas. I think the problem is that it's so subjective. What is good design?
Totally.
But there's got to be some principles in it. I guess what are the principles that you are trying to articulate and capture in your own work?
I mean, I think there'll be a number of, there's, always basic things like you want light in the right spots. Colours reflect light as well, and what that means to you in certain spaces. And some colours like blues can be great, but the light that comes off them is not necessarily a colour that you want to spend all your time in. They might be your transitional spaces, so there's a whole lot of things I think about light and colour that are really important. But I think for us as well, we kind of look at there being a purpose for all of the decisions that are made within an interior or a piece of architecture. And that doesn't necessarily, it has to be a practical thing. It can be an emotional thing, but there's kind of a reason that everything is there, so it feels like it has an evolution of purpose. I don't know if you describe it.
Well, I think it's also got to do what the client asks,
There's the client as well.
You've got to think that there's somebody's actually paying you to do something, and you've got to do it. You've got to somehow satisfy. Hopefully, you deliver more than what they expect. And then, in a way, if you sort of tick the boxes of the pragmatism and actually you've got on top of what the function and the program of the job is, from there it's about having all of the fundamentals in a way that we learnt as young designers of sort of, as you say, balance and colour and light and composition and all of those things that it actually takes a whole career to master.
It does.
Yeah.
Do you ever master it? Probably not.
I don't think there's ever a job where I feel as though we absolutely
nailed it.
Yeah, got it right. I can walk away and say that was it.
Wow.
Every job I sort of feel like
could have done better.
Could have done better.
Really?
Should have done better. Yeah.
Is there a particular feeling that you hope to embody in your work?
Some spaces, should be serene and quiet and kind of reflective, and then some spaces you just want to inject, colour and personality and action, and So I think, and that isn't a feeling, like that's just someone not really, when they go into it, someone with an untrained eye or a civilian, we call them, goes into
what does a civilian think?
What
does a civilian do?
Yeah, you just want a civilian to go into that, and they might not be able to define what that is, but they're going to get some sort of feeling of the space, ultimately is kind of what you want.
That's so great. But I love that because, you know, ultimately it's one thing to impress our peers and design to peers who understand that which you do, but to actually reach the common folk, or the civilian, as you say, I guess that's the ultimate aim, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
we don't need to understand it.
Over-obsessed with pleasing our peers,
I think
and
so.
how our peers think of it, and what do other designers, how are they going to regard what we're doing? But
what would they do?
Really, that's not what it's about.
No.
It's actually about the people that are using it and what they feel and what they're going to enjoy. And you know, a lot of the small details that we really love don't get picked up on, and that's okay. It's really about the feeling of whether they're going to love it or not.
How do you make sure that your client actually gets what they're after? Because I think a lot of the times as a designer, you know, we acquire certain preferences, and you know, our ego likes to come in and knock on the door sometimes. How do you make sure that that doesn't happen?
Firstly, I think flexibility as a designer is a sign of experience.
Yes.
That often it's the youngest, most inexperienced designers that are the most inflexible. They go, this is the way it's got to be designed, and if they get resistance against that, it's like they're not going to move. When it's a real sign of experience when you can kind of roll with the punches, and if someone says, I don't like that, I'd like this, you can still see another outcome. You're saying, okay, I can work with that, and that's going to work like that. And there are some times where you don't want to budge. You know that this is the right thing, and if you have that sense of flexibility, I find the clients listen to those times when you put your foot down and say, I'm happy to accept all those ones and work with you. On this one, I feel like I'm right, and you've got to do that. And generally, they listen to that, and they say, okay, let's do that one.
You have to pick your battles.
You've got to pick your battles.
But it's
you've got to pick your battles.
It actually like lead
you've got to.
Your client. It's kind of part of the job, isn't it?
But some of it can be about the process of how we work as well, especially on some of the residential. You can have a more like we spend a lot of time during construction. Like it's good to be able to change things during construction if you want. Because often that's where you get a best result too. Just drawing something and sending it sort of, you know, if you've got such a tight contract, it has to be drawn in the office and it gets sent off to Wonderland to be built. You're never really getting that. There's a whole layer during construction that's really important, I think, if you want the client to be happy.
How do you work together? Because obviously you have the most amazing creative partnership that must enrich your output. But is there ever a time when you guys just don't like each other very much?
Yes, there are.
Because I talk too much.
Kirsten talks way too much.
In the office.
Here we go. Because you're really quiet most of the time.
That's right.
Is that
it? I think that we are very fortunate to have a great working relationship. We've been working together for nearly 20 years.
That's a good,
which is a pretty good, solid relationship, especially in a creative field where you're both being the creatives and you're both passionate. Undoubtedly, that's been for us successful, largely because we respect one another a lot, and we offer
of course we do.
This is going well, but today things change.
That's true. That's true.
But I think that we don't always see eye to eye on the design, no doubt about it. But we generally have ownership over one of us has ownership over the project, so we sort of accept that from the start. We work on the projects to start with, but both of us generally don't work all the way through on a project because we've got our own relationships with the clients and everybody like that. But by and large, we work very differently, but by and large we kind of accept that it's going to come out the best way in the end anyway. Like I've got complete confidence in what Kirsten does, and I don't know.
She has a lot of confidence.
I've got a lot of confidence. I've got a lot of confidence.
But and I think I just sort of that flexibility again really works.
And knowing when to challenge each other and when actually to kind of you know.
We work the way we work on the projects is really different. I think that in sort of thinking about talking with you today, I was thinking, how do we work differently? And I think that Kirsten starts a project with very small details, like thinking about the really fine details, like a material
Yeah,
for a whole house. You could be just looking at a little, or a little detail for a bit of joinery and say, this feels right for this house, you know, and then from that,
from there, the bigger
kitchen
ideas
starts,
form.
and from the kitchen something else starts, and then it's all starting to take shape.
When I see new finishes or materials or something come in, I love keeping them on my desk and just sitting them there and working out what I'm going to do with them at some point.
Kirsten, actually, there's a quote on your website, which I was reading carefully. Great website. And the quote from you says, it's about looking deeper. Sometimes it's the ugly things that are the most beautiful. I actually really love that quote, and I just want to hear a little bit more about what do you mean by that and how do you approach that in your project?
I think it's something that we go into things thinking like, don't treat a project like it's doing plastic cosmetic surgery on, you know, an old face. Actually think about it, it's like something has already got an element of beauty, or, you know, what is actually great about it, and finding something that's in that. I mean, it's often you start with things and think, how often do you do, even like you think of the kid when you eat food and you go, that's terrible, and you eat it 10 years later and go, oh my God, that's delicious.
Yes.
So sometimes it's just giving yourself time to like understand what something really is.
Yes.
Especially interior designers, we have been trained to just go in, rip it out, start again. And so I think it's all about that kind of thing.
And I just think also sometimes it's the creative tension of something that's maybe a bit obscure and, you know, not technically beautiful.
Because in urban design, you think of Jane Jacobs, who did all that work in New York in the 60s to stop the city being demolished and the fine grain. And she talked about this idea that you have to have a whole mix of things in urban design. But one of them is, you know, keeping some old parts. And it's almost like applying those big principles back into interiors or into smaller scale architecture as well. It's actually that layering that makes it feel great, I think, rather than it feeling pristine and new.
Yeah.
In our sample library, like everybody's sample library, I guess, the materials that we're using all the time just seem to, they come to the surface because all the staff are rummaging. But the best thing is to just go to the bottom of the pile and see the stuff that hasn't been touched in years and years, and pull those out and just see new life in those materials. And it could be an old, an old fabric, an old piece of timber, an old stone or whatever, and realise that there's actually beauty in that thing that's been sitting at the bottom of the drawer for so long, and make it work, you know.
Yeah, well, if it was once relevant and loved, surely there's something in it. John, there was another quote from you on your website, as well, which says, "I love working with people who have big aspirations. Set your sights high, make your moral compass true, and ensure your passions are genuine. You will then attract the same in return." And I'm wondering, is this synergy something that you always seek with your clients, with your team, with your contractors, and why is this so important?
Yeah, I do think that if you set your kind of level of acceptance high, and that could be with the people you're working with your team, with your clients, and you, in a way, it sounds kind of brutal, but you disregard the rest, you'll get more like-minded. You'll get more of it happening. It's almost, if you sort of attract a certain type, you'll get more of that. But if you cut out a lot of it and really just realise where you want to be, you'll get more of that. You know, so I think that's I kind of like to think that that's the way I like to work. But also I do think with that quote that communication and the relationships we have with our clients and our builders that we work with and the contractors and the team, our own team, that is more than half the job. You know, that the communication and the relationships you build and the way you can talk to clients and the way you can talk to everybody that's associated with your profession, that's how you get a successful design outcome.
Obviously, you guys are quite established now. People come to you for a certain outcome, and they know what you're about. But it's a really hard thing to do when you're maybe starting on, and maybe it takes a while to figure out
I think I have actually.
You've always been like that.
I think I've always valued communication, and something I'm always telling our team is to pick up the phone. Don't keep sending emails. It's faceless. It doesn't. People receive emails and they sort of it lacks a warmth. And having talking to people and meeting people, and just through the process of the project, I've kind of always valued that. And listening to builders. I think builders are often under-mentioned in our projects,
how much
because
work they put in.
we just deal with the most incredible people who build these
and
projects.
they're an absolute wealth of knowledge as well. I think so much to learn.
Yeah, and there was I think there was a kind of an old school kind of attitude that the architect is superior and we tell them what to do.
Yeah.
But if you blow that away and you start listening to builders and you bring on their experience and they listen to you, that's the way to work. That's the way to make it happen. Yeah.
You talk about longevity in your work and how important it is. And I mean, I can see that in your work. You are trying to create something that does stand the test of time. But I'm wondering, how do you actually do that? Because those people who might take that approach might end up with outcomes that are quite formulaic and predictable.
It's almost, I wouldn't say we're strict modernists, but I guess I got my architectural training was very modernist based in that. And that I think the thing is like coming up with a concept for a project, and a concept is not necessarily based on any images at all. A concept is just based on, like, it's a fluffy thing going on. You know, it's like a cloudy something,
ideas,
spirit or sort of thing in your head that you have a kind of almost a feeling for what that concept is going to be. And then once you've got that, then you define that back to the visual. But I think, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know how every other designer works, but I think some designers start with the pure visual first. And
the
then
inspiration image.
Yeah, and then I think that can block your creative thought sometimes. So if you haven't got that and then you're working out ways to get to that, it can help you kind of free yourself a little bit. I mean, not to say we always get it right, but we try to really work around that being that there's and then that also gives a consistency through the project, so it feels like a collective kind of thought.
It sounds to me like you're both so, you just love and live and breathe design, and you're just like really obsessed with it still, like after all these years. You've been practicing for a while and run this business, and it can be grueling.
I feel like it's getting more personal, and it's more about what I personally like, and those same sort of ways of understanding feeling, like walking down the street or just having those sort of moments that are actually away from the computer screen and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. That's when you have moments of real inspiration about a feeling, and I just, the other day I was listening to some music and it was absolutely beautiful, and I thought if I can bring, and I was thinking about a project, and I thought if I can bring the feeling of this music into these spaces, and then you start thinking about what materials would that be to feel like that music, and it's coming from a totally different perspective than looking at images, and it's not really trying to stay on top of an industry so much, it's just trying to bring my own kind of personal sort of aesthetic into projects, and my understanding of experience.
I think music has the most beautiful parallel to interiors and architecture, especially. How that can be turned into a spatial experience is quite extraordinary.
Remember that time we played a piece of music to the client? That music when we were doing
don't remind me of that.
So you can get really inspired by music, but we had this piece of music. And the presentation just flopped.
Oh my God, they were just like,
we loved it.
Yeah, we're like,
you can be too literal about it, and you're like,
oh my God,
this piece of music, this is exactly what we are. And so we went to this big presentation and we said, we first want to play you this music. And they were like,
why?
That piece of music sucks to start with. And we shouldn't have mentioned the music.
No, we should have
we
told
should have
them.
just kept it as inspiration and just shown them the design. So it was like, okay, let's just be privately inspired and still stick to the script.
That's so good. So you don't nail it every time in the client
presentation.
We do
not nail it every time. No, we've done plenty of failures.
Yeah, a lot of egg on the face.
Totally. We walked out. We just knew that was a disaster.
Okay, don't do that again.
Don't do that again.
Don't tell the client if the music inspired you.
Yeah.
So you have made your product debut in 2019. You designed
Something
a beautiful
like
table,
that,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, when you're designing a product versus a space, is the process different?
Well, it's faster. It's so much faster, which is a really great thing.
It's less complicated, maybe.
It's less complicated. There are less other stakeholders, and it's something that we can control more because it's just a product that we develop, and it's a really enjoyable sideline to the interiors and the architecture. It's when we were talking about those fine details that inspire a lot of our projects, I think that attitude lends us well to doing furniture and product design, because we're really very tactile with the way we consider materials and shapes and forms and things like that. And again, working with craftspeople that are actually developing the techniques to build it, you know, and that table in particular was not an easy thing to construct. But it's a hugely satisfying thing to get into, don't you think?
Yeah. What do you look for in products and furniture when you are specifying them for your projects?
Do you know what? Sometimes, I know for me, I think I don't even overthink it. I just think that
feels right.
That just feels right, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, we've been working on it's a more commercial project where we made it was actually, we were selecting all the furniture during COVID when everyone was locked up and thinking about all our Aussie designers and makers. And so we just did a big focus on pretty much most of the furniture on the ground floor is going to be either designed in Australia or New Zealand. You know, that kind of gave us a different... I've never really selected furniture that way before. I think that's probably... Usually we would...
it's kind of a fairly instinctive
it's
response.
Instinctive. That's the right way. I think it's totally instinctive.
Look, I want to wrap up with some quick fire questions. This is the tough part of our chat. I hope you're ready.
How are you going to do this? Just whoever presses the buzzer first.
I think we should do it that way. I know about what the best mistake is that you ever made, played music to your client, you know?
Exactly. A mistake that I think we've both made is putting ourselves in the deep end on projects when we were younger that were probably over our head and just made it work and just been resourceful enough to do it, but taking the plunge and sort of, in some ways, convincing people that we can do it when we probably couldn't do it. But we're smart enough or resourceful enough to actually make up ground really quickly and make it happen, because that's when you sort of learn a lot and progress and move into areas you probably wouldn't go into if you played it safe.
I'm interested in what rules do you live by? Maybe Kirsten, you can take this one.
Do you know what? I actually try to be quite healthy. But I don't always live by those rules, but I try to have that rule. And I think that's a fundamental thing. If that starts, I think everything else can kind of flow.
Best piece of advice you've been given?
I don't know if it's the best, but a very memorable one was when somebody said, if you tell someone you're going to do something, you've got to do it. And I think that's a really important thing, because you've got to be true to your word. Quick?
That's quick. Very, very honourable. Your greatest extravagance with me?
Clothes is probably my greatest.
Clothes.
Yeah. Wow. Wasting money on clothes.
You look unreal. I love it. And how would you like to be remembered? It's a big question.
It is a totally big question. I guess you'd want to be remembered for, I guess, being a true person about, having a bit of like integrity and who you are, being who you are.
I know it's boring, but I think the same thing. I think that if we can be remembered as being genuine, kind of true to yourself, like our own people, I think I'm happy with that.
Wow, that's how I think of you too. That's why you're here. Look.
Thanks, darling.
No, thank you so much for being here. It's
thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure and an honour.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.